This fourth Sunday of Easter is the turning point for this entire season. The first 3 weeks of Easter, beginning with the great vigil of Easter, presents us each week, each Sunday, with one of the resurrection appearances of Jesus. The next 3 weeks will be getting us ready for the great feast of Pentecost as we hear mostly excerpts from John's long Last Supper narrative. And this particular Sunday stands right between the two. Each year in our 3-year cycle of lectionary readings, on this Sunday we hear excerpts from John chapter 10, the so-called Good Shepherd chapter. Now in reality, the term Good Shepherd only appears once in every 3 years. We had it last year, so we won't get it again until this Sunday in 2024. But even though it's not used in the reading that we just heard today, that theme of shepherd and sheep is still part of that reading, and it gives us an opportunity to reflect for a few minutes on what Jesus meant as he referred to shepherd and sheep, what for him a shepherd was, and what for him a shepherd was not. As is the case with the rest of the Bible, it's always important for us to look at our readings in their historical context to make sense of them. And this particular reading began with John noting that it was the feast of the dedication. Jesus was in the temple, dedication or Hanukkah, so it's in the winter time, the beginning of winter in December. And Jesus is walking there in the portico of the temple. Now Hanukkah, as you may know, is a celebration of the victory, a military victory in 164 BCE, the victory of the Jews led by Judas Maccabeus, who drove out of the land the armies of the Syrian king Antiochus IV and rededicated the temple which had been desecrated by him. Kings and military leaders, like Judas Maccabeus, like to use the term shepherd to describe their role. You know, you think, for example, of David and his role, first of all as a literal shepherd, according to the stories, and then later as a different kind of shepherd, one who was a commander and king of Israel. And very often, kings like to use that image that I am your shepherd. What they meant is, I'm in charge here, and you do what I say. Some of Jesus' contemporaries were apparently looking for that kind of shepherd here, especially in light of the celebration of Hanukkah. One who commanded, one who ruled, one who would drive out the armies of Rome. But Jesus rejected that notion of being a shepherd. Jesus rejected that notion of greatness, and instead it proclaimed and modeled for others a completely different way of being a shepherd, a completely different way of being great. Jesus modeled for us the example of being a person of service. According to the gospel stories, Jesus' service was not just a matter of rhetoric, a particular term, a theoretical kind. Instead, it was something that he put into practice in all that he did. When he, for example, he encountered someone who was sick or lame or blind, he didn't lecture them simply about, just be patient with your suffering here. Everything will be better someday. In another life, you'll be rewarded. No, instead, he healed them. When he encountered people who were hungry, he didn't tell them, well, you need to think about more spiritual things, and someday you'll be fed when you're in heaven. Instead, when they were hungry, he fed them. And when he encountered people who were outcast in society, he didn't just pass them by or try to ignore them. He went out to them and let them know by his words, and sometimes even by his touch, that they were important, that they were valued, that they were loved. But that example didn't stop there. Some of the early Christians that we hear about, for example, in the Acts of the Apostles, followed Jesus' example. They heard the message and they embodied it and practiced in their life. We hear about one of them in our first reading today, taken from the Acts of the Apostles. Her name was Tabitha. Now, she apparently had spent her life making and providing clothes for the widows in her community. Widows at that time had basically and essentially no means of support unless they had any children to take care of them. They were among the poorest, most neglected, most at-risk people in society at that time. Many people heard about the work that she had done, and I'm sure they thought, well, gee, that's a nice thing for this lady to do. She's very kind. But all in all, you know, it's really not a big thing. It's not that important. And all in all, you know, looking at the big picture, she's not really that important. Even among the community of believers, Tabitha didn't stand out. She apparently wasn't a great preacher like Peter was. She wasn't a missionary like Paul was. The one thing she could do, she knew how to sew. And she decided to use whatever gift, whatever talent, whatever ability she had to make a practical difference in the lives of others, a difference that might enhance their lives, the people around them, especially those who were most in need. Notice that in the story when Tabitha died, those who recognized her death and recognized her importance saw it as a great crisis in the community. The reading says they immediately sent for Peter and said, "You've got to come here right now." When he arrived, he found the widows there in tears, grieving for her. They were devastated. This was a major loss for them, something that had a profound effect on their everyday lives. Now, this was taking place about the same time that the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, was removed from office by the Romans and called back home. He was removed from the job that he had. It was about the same time that Herod Antipas, who had been the king over Galilee, had died. And about the same time that the Emperor Tiberius had died as well. And while we don't know all their names, I think it's a safe guess that many other seemingly important leaders in the community around them had also died. But as best we can tell, the people in and around Tabitha's community didn't really care. It didn't make a bit of difference to them in their daily lives. But Tabitha's death did matter. To them, she and her serving work quietly done behind the scenes. She was the one who affected their lives in a life-giving way. To them, she was the truly important person in their community. You know, all too often when it comes to carrying out our baptismal promises, we kind of try to get ourselves off the hook. We say, you know, I don't have any of these great skills, these great talents that I can use to make a difference in people's lives right here. I'm not really that important, and the things that I can do really aren't that important. And in fact, most of us aren't going to hit the news anytime in our lives for any great projects that we've carried out or great discoveries that we've made. But it could just be that the many small, practical things that we can do for other people are the things that affect people's lives most profoundly, the things that they most need in their lives. Think, for example, on this Mother's Day, about the countless small things that mothers do for their children, and fathers as well. More specifically, maybe think about the countless small things that your mothers did for you, things that made a tremendous difference in the life, things that made you who you are, things that contributed to and shaped your life more than the things that were done by the significant people, the so-called important people that made the news during your lifetime. Think also about the countless small things that you can do for other people, whatever the gifts might be you have, whatever abilities you might have in your life. Like parents, like a shepherd, like Tabitha, we all have the capacity to do something to enrich the lives of others, to bless and brighten the lives of the people around us, people whom we know and people whose names we'll probably never know. And it is in doing these things, lovingly and generously, that we're truly following the example of Jesus, the Good Shepherd of us all.